New business, Section C, Memorandum of Understanding for a behavioral health hospital at 6 and 10 Innovation Way to address safety policies and demand on municipal resources. So just to tee this up for Megan, Attorney Currier, our town council or attorney, we've been working as a council and with the applicant and regarding an MOU. Megan, if you could take over from there.
Absolutely, yes. So I'm Megan Carrier. For anyone that doesn't know me, I'm the attorney that's representing the town on this negotiation. So this agenda item relates to an 89,000 square foot behavioral health hospital, which is proposed at 6 and 10 Innovation Way. The applicant for the project is Terrytown Real Estate Holdings, Inc. On May 1st of this year, the planning board granted conditional approval of a site plan application relating to this project. And one of those conditions required the applicant to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the town regarding safety policies and the demand that the hospital will have on municipal resources. The condition of approval specifically required that the Londonderry Town Council approve that memorandum of understanding. Since that time, I've been assisting the council to negotiate the terms of that MOU to come up with something that satisfies that condition. Ari Pollack, who is the attorney representing Terrytown, is here tonight as well, I see, with his clients. Early in the negotiations, the parties identified a set of safety procedures that all found to be satisfactory, and those terms have remained essentially the same throughout the negotiation process. The bulk of the negotiations have been aimed at identifying and assessing the demand that the hospital is expected to have on the town's municipal resources, with a specific focus on police and emergency services. And throughout that process, the town has made an effort to support any monetary proposal with the research and data that it has been able to uncover. The parties exchanged a number of drafts of the MOU reflecting various approaches to addressing this municipal resources issue. 3 drafts have been exchanged since last Thursday, September 19th. Specifically on the 19th, Terrytown proposed a version of the MOU which incorporated a payment of $4 million to be paid prior to the certificate of occupancy. The MOU reflected the payment would be allocated by the town council to its municipal departments in its judgment and for the best interests of the town. On the 21st, the council authorized me to send Terrytown's attorney a revised version of the agreement, which retains that $4 million payment and added a requirement that beginning 4 years after the issuance of the CO, the parties would conduct an annual review intended to essentially balance tax revenues against the demand on the hospital. Obviously, if the costs associated with the demand exceeded the tax revenues, an additional payment would be owed, and if it didn't, then no payment would be owed. On the 22nd, so yesterday, Terrytown sent back a revised version. This version eliminates the balancing process I just described, but increases that $4 million payment to $5 million. $500,000 of this payment would be made within 6 months of the planning board executing the site plan in order to allow the town some advance funds to hire and train police officers in advance of the hospital opening. The remainder would be paid on or before the issuance of the CO. This version of the MOU also incorporates the parties' agreement that any final amendment to the site plan approval will trigger a requirement that the parties meet and discuss whether the MOU should remain in effect and whether any amendments are appropriate. The goal for tonight is for the council to discuss that most recent version of the MOU. And so with that, I will turn this over to consideration by the council.
All right, thank you, Megan. So for clarification purposes, the most recent series of negotiations, there was a $4 million proposal from the applicant to the council. The council countered agreeing with $4 million, but have a reevaluation. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. That would begin 4 years after the issuance of the certificate of occupancy.
Thank you. And then the applicant rejected that and countered again for a $5 million offer. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Well, at council, it's open for discussion. What do you say?
I'd say we move forward with the agreement that is before us. It's a sound notion for us to move forward.
I disagree. So I believe that what was proposed in the beginning, the annual review, was in the best interest of the taxpayer. I think the current agreement that we're looking at is not in the best interest of the Londonderry taxpayer. The $5 million, even with interest and other investments that Justin would be able to get us, the money would probably run out in year 6 or year 7. So the taxpayer's on the hook after that. The tax revenue that would be generated would not offset the expenses. So I do not believe that this current agreement is in the best interest of the taxpayer in Londonderry.
Okay. Any other comment from the council?
I would say I agree with Ron. Without those protections in place for the Londonderry taxpayer, the liability of the town is just too great of something for me to feel comfortable going forward with.
Ron?
I think you have to step back and look in what the laws of the state are and the process that was followed. The organization came here to this council and asked for a rezoning. Rezoning was voted on and granted by this council. They then followed the law, went to the planning board, followed the process, and have an approved plan with only one conditional piece. In good faith and in reasonable negotiations, we went back and forth. If you look at what's in front of us as their final proposal for $5 million, they talked about during the planning board process that if there's probably a reasonable chance that they'll expand the hospital from 144 beds to 190 some odd beds. Written into this agreement is that we would revisit this MOU. Considering that nobody has a crystal ball and knows what can happen in the future, I think reasonable people could say that this is a very reasonable offer. I think you also have to step back and say these kinds of facilities are around the country and nobody has this kind of protection for their community at all. I think the protection that we're offering the community far surpasses anyone else in the country. Mm-hmm. So to say that we're not doing this in the best interest of the Londonderry taxpayers, that's just not completely true. We have done what's in the best interest of the Londonderry taxpayers. We have done all the right things. We have fulfilled our obligations, and we have been reasonable. The applicant has made the claim that the calls won't be what they're going to be. We've gotten assurances from the state that they're going to be actively engaged, and we've gotten the assurances from the highest level that they will work with us to make sure that the hospital is operating correctly and that the services that are being provided are being done correctly and that they're there to hold them accountable as well. So the Londonderry taxpayers have been served better than any other taxpayer in the country that has a facility with this organization. That's the facts.
Thank you, Councilor Farrell. So, if I recall correctly, when we did the zoning amendment to the ordinance, hospital was defined but not permitted. And what we did was we added hospital as a permitted use for the business Gateway Business District. And from my understanding and my belief, that is all that the council did.
The HHS deputy commissioner was here and told us what the facility was going to be.
I understand that.
We knew exactly what it was going to be.
But for all intents and purposes, all we did was vote to allow hospital as a permitted use in the Gateway District. And the way I look at it is I put a lot of thought into this. And when you look at a call, and I did I did ask what a run card was from the PD, and I asked how staffing works. I'm sorry, from fire, and I asked how staffing works for the PD with their shifts and schedule and the policies that are in place. If there was a call, the policy would be to send 2 police units. Say there's a medical call. So we're saying Medic 3 from Central, which is a 2-person company, would go up to that call. An engine company of 3 would go to that call as well. So that's 5 people just from fire alone. 2 units from PD. A battalion chief, depending on the level of severity of the call, if it's Charlie, Delta, Echo, or whatever. A shift supervisor, so we're talking 9. What if there's a situation that there's 2 patients? We'd have Medic 4 come from Central, leaving North Station empty, Central Station empty, depending on mutual aid. I'm aware that there are always, not always, that there are often contemporaneous calls going on at one time. So say that situation where there's 9 or 11 first responders on that scene, and another call comes in, CPR in progress. We're taking Station 2, who has 3, manning Medic 2, or their medic, to respond, as well as a mutual aid engine company. That's 2 calls. And we are, on the fire side, 100% depleted. All companies in service. And while I appreciate the negotiation from Terrytown and the commitment to be reasonable, my concern is, and I understand, I heard investment in $5 million and stuff like that. But as John mentioned at the beginning, things aren't getting cheaper. Fire engines aren't getting cheaper. Police cars aren't getting cheaper. Personnel is not getting cheaper. Training isn't getting cheaper. And at the end of the day, where does that burden lie? And for me personally, I found solace, if that's the right word, or I found peace knowing that there was an option. And I understand if the build out happens, we would renegotiate an MOU. But we're talking a significant amount of beds. And the opportunity for our community to not receive the care that they paid for, that they expect. And again, we are an aging community. The average response time in the north sector for a mutual aid engine is 10 minutes. That's 10 minutes that a patient who could be in a motor vehicle accident with entrapment is sitting there. And that concerns me.
We're not supposed to get into operations of how things work. So why don't we ask the experts? Police Chief, why don't you tell us what you think?
Can we be more specific about the question you'd like me to answer?
You're getting $5 million to deploy against this and to support this facility alone over the next 4 to 5 years.
So, as discussed earlier in prior meetings, as was alluded earlier, we talked about what the needs of the police department would be. We talked about what the financial burden to the taxpayer would be. We talked about what that looks like over the course of a hiring process from start to finish. We spoke about what the dollar amount would be for the officers that we feel adequately would be able to staff that part of town. We provided, with the help of the finance director, the appropriate dollar amount that we feel would be a need. And it seems to me that these meetings have taken place. The funds have been discussed. As far as what I need, the need from the police department is 6. The dollar amounts that have been presented would cover, as discussed in these agreements. So anything beyond that time frame, I think, Counselor, you had mentioned by year 5 or 6. I didn't project out that far, but I know that Mr. Campbell would have that exact number. I believe that it would suffice for the police department side of the house for that. And again, I can't speak for LFD, but my side of the house, I would be fine.
Let's hear from the fire chief. Keeping in mind, they're still going to pay taxes.
Thank you very much. The first time Tarrytown came before us, you were the chairman at the time, invited the chief and I up to speak and to get our take on things. And what I said, through experience, advocating for the taxpayer and the resident first, is that anytime a new business comes to town, obviously it strains the service. There's a draw on the service. Following the police chief's lead, him and his team did an outstanding job collecting data and fact. Remarkable job. Taking his lead, the fire department also did the same. And using the resources we had, we called other communities throughout the country that have Acadia Health involved in their communities. We called those fire departments and said, give us some facts, give us the data. What do you experience on your departments? Some departments didn't return phone calls. Other departments were very wishy-washy in their comments, wouldn't commit one way or another. But what we did find, and again, these are the numbers through other departments, is that it's about 1 call a day. Now, that's a fact that we were, or a piece of data that we were able to ascertain. However, there's data and there's fact, and then there's experience. And a man with an experience is not at the mercy of a man with an opinion. We know when something similar came to town at the Elliott Urgent Care, we were told 6 calls in a year. We did 12 calls in the first day. So, falling back to experience, because that's what we do when we don't know what to do, we fall back to experience. Although we're being told 1 call, similar to us being told 6 calls that were exceeded in the first 24 hours of operation, it's reasonable to assume from my position that it will be more than the 1 call per day. I've seen it. My history and my experience in running back-to-back-to-back calls at Elliott has proved it. There's also no mechanism, and it would be very disingenuous and not truthful and not fair, quite frankly, if I came up here and just said, we need X amount of firefighters because, well, what's the delta? What's the why? There is no mechanism in place. I can just tell you what we found through our research, taking the police chief's lead, that it's 1 call a day. Experience tells me otherwise. And anyone else in this community that's been here for as long as the urgent care has been can speak to the same. And so that's what I would offer you.
So the $5 million helps.
Money always helps.
And you knew exactly what kind of hospital was going in here after they met with the town council.
Me personally?
Yeah, it was presented that night, right?
It was.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
All right. Any further discussion from the council? So,
I know it's not a public hearing. I'm asking for permission to speak.
please, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Ari Pollack. I'm an attorney at the Gallagher firm in Concord. I've been representing Tarrytown, the applicant, throughout this process, as was discussed by a number of speakers, and I won't belabor the point. We We started at the zoning level. We went to the planning board on a site plan review, and we ended up with a condition of approval that required a memorandum of understanding on public safety. It was open book. We knew this was coming. We accepted the condition, and upon receiving that condition, we entered into negotiations with the town. We've had town councilors, the chief of police, the town attorney, all participating with us in these discussions. What we found as the conversation went forward is that the memorandum of understanding was based upon a series of assumptions, a series of what-ifs and hypotheticals about what this facility would look like and how it would behave in the town of Londonderry. We did our best to find data that related to other systems, other locations, other similar locations, other operations within New Hampshire. And frankly, my conclusion, I'm not speaking for others, but my conclusion was that it was very difficult to find direct comparisons, that you end up needing to understand the lived experience before you can figure out what the true needs would be. Services that every other taxpayer receives for the benefit of their taxes were essentially deemed to be insufficient because of the unique nature of this facility and because of the unknowns that related to this facility. We started searching for a way to bridge that gap, to provide comfort. Again, a multi-person participation over the course of multiple discussions, emails, drafts. You heard a summary of them tonight. This was a seriously labor-intensive effort, and it continued until this evening, frankly. Our mission at some point turned to acknowledging that there was not a crystal ball, that the number of calls for service could not be a finite guess at this moment for this facility. And what we instead decided to do was focus on giving the town and its experts, police and fire, emergency services, 911 support, the tools that they would need above and beyond our tax payment, which would be annual and significant, a for-profit enterprise, no alternative but paying the taxes, giving the town the tools that it would need to essentially create an endowment. And that's what this money is intended to be. It's intended to be seed money to do whatever, frankly, the town in its wisdom on budgeting, the town in its input from department heads, feels it is necessary to prepare for this facility. The research doesn't end, the conversation doesn't end, the participation doesn't end. One of the things that was summarized as far as other parts of the MOU, a continuing relationship between the town and this operator, an expert in the field of behavioral health and therapy, to have a continuing relationship there. We've got safety procedures, we've got training workshops, we've got an ongoing dialogue. We're going to be located right in town. We're not going to be strangers. We're going to be available and accessible and part of the fabric of the community. We also have targeted a non-residential area, which is why the rezoning was popular in the first place. The consequence, of course, is it puts it at a far distance from the police resources. However, that again was something considered when we discussed the MOU, and again considered when we thought about what's the appropriate amount of endowment funds to launch this in the right direction and give that discretion to the people who can exercise it and need it most. I think that's what we've done here. I'll leave you with one other piece of information. The more recent discussions that we've had boiled down to a cost per service or a cost per call for service. All we can do is look at the prior iterations of the budget and the police logs, and I think the number ranges from year to year, right? The number that's budgeted to the police force changes, the number of calls changes. But over the last few years, there have been some number of hundreds of dollars associated with each call in terms of dividing budget by number. I think for this year, we were provided the number $350 per call. Maybe that holds, maybe that changes as the year rolls over. $5 million at $350 per call is 14,000 calls for service. That is a tremendous number of calls for service that would be protected by this endowment, plus annual taxes every year. So I ask you to think about what more you could ask for than a lump sum endowment in your trusted hands, working with your experts to put this facility on the best track forward to address not only a national and state issue, but also a regional issue, which is, of course, why we've got the support of the highest levels of state government as well. Thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you, Attorney Pollock.
Mr. Chair, if I may. I think one common thing said by people from the council and said by Mr. Ari is that none of us have a crystal ball. None of us know what this is going to look like. We don't know if there's going to be a lot of service calls. We don't know if it's going to be just a fine neighbor. We don't know. And that's part of my issue, is just having to guess with the future of the residents of this community. The only way I saw fit to move forward with that guess, with the hands, with our police, with our fire, and the men and women that contribute and serve, is to have that evaluation after we have solid data, after we know, after a period of time, that we know this data is going to be the data moving forward. And we can all come from a place where this is what it is. Then we know, and if it's not enough, we can reevaluate. And from that, I felt from a place of certainty, I could make that decision. But because we have to look in a crystal ball with the way this is set up, this is why I cannot support this.
So as the person who wrote the framework that you just discussed, because I did, and then passed it on to be cleaned up and everything, I understand what you're saying. They rejected that, and they increased it from 4 million to 5 million. At some point, you got to step back and look at it and say, are we being reasonable? I don't know the answer to that question. But I do understand what you're saying. They don't find that acceptable. I mean, if there was other language that would get us there, I'm sure somebody would have come up with it by now. But I do understand what you're saying, having been the person who wrote it. Mm-hmm. But I'm also the person who wrote in that same framework that if they expanded the hospital, they had to come back to the table. So I didn't get everything. I got something, and got another $1 million. So, got to ask yourself, and I think I'm the one who first said, I kept looking around for my crystal ball. I don't have one. But nobody, the Woodmont agreement that we have today doesn't exist anywhere else in the country. This agreement doesn't exist anywhere else in the country. So when we say we're not doing the best for the Londonderry taxpayers, that's what bothers me. We're not disenfranchising the taxpayers. We did do our best. Everyone may not agree, but we did do our best for the Londonderry taxpayers.
And I think that reasonable people can reasonably disagree.
I agree.
And at the end of the day, from my 1 of 5 perspective, that was in these discussions with our town attorney, that our proposals were reasonable. And that's what I have to say to that. Megan, let me rephrase that. I see two ways that the council can proceed. So a decision needs to be made if the council will approve that most recent counteroffer that was sent from the applicant today. And that would be in the form of a motion.
Yes.
What?
You either make a motion to deny or approve.
So
someone who's not in favor of the agreement can make a motion to deny. Or make a motion to approve if you're in favor of the agreement.
So at this time, I'll ask someone to make a motion, period. There is no motion on the floor.
Nobody seconded.
At this time, I'll make a motion to approve our current agreement that is in front of us.
Okay, so I have a motion on the floor from Ted to approve the most current MOU for a behavioral health hospital at 6 and 10 Innovation Way to address safety policies and demand on municipal resources. Do I have a second?
Well, somebody has to second it. It would be nice if it didn't have to be me who wrote the whole framework. So you guys aren't going to second it and put it to a vote? It's got to go to a vote, guys. You're not going to second it. Nobody else will second it. Then I'll second it.
All right.
It's got to go to a vote.
So we have a motion from Ted, a second from John. All in favor of accepting or approving the most recent MOU from the applicant, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Chair votes nay as well. The MOU, the council rejects the most recent proposal.